for example, you cannot have 20 people taking a shower in the garden with a hose because the building was not suitable. So we tried to improve living conditions and at the same time deal with friction between migrants and Cypriots.
How can migration be governed in a divided city, on a divided island, and within a fragmented region, where history, politics, and culture draw sharp front lines? And what happens when such a region is gripped by demographic upheaval and simultaneous geopolitical turmoil? Today, I am interviewing Eleni Mavrou, a major figure in Cypriot public life, the first woman to serve as mayor of Nicosia. She later became Minister of Interior during a period of rising migration pressures and intense European debate. Her tenure saw her navigating the complexities of immigration governance in Cyprus. We will discuss the daily realities of migration from street level community tensions to black market activities and from managing criminality to negotiating with European and international actors. So, Mrs. Mavrou, thank you very much for talking with me today.
It's a pleasure.
What first brought you into contact with the issue of immigration in your political life?
Life itself. I mean, migration was not really an issue for Cyprus until the late 80s, beginning of the 90s. We used to be a country of migrants. We were not used to having immigrants in Cyprus. So the policy started changing in the early 90s, mostly to encourage employment in various sectors of the economy, tourism, agriculture, etc. But from some point onwards, the numbers of migrants started increasing rapidly. And then the numbers of refugees started increasing rapidly. So when I took over as mayor of Nicosia, already migrants had a very strong presence in certain areas of the city, especially the walled city, but not only.
Especially which? The walled city?
The
wall.
Within the walls.
In the very center of Nicosia.
Yeah, the old city,
Yes.
let's say. And this created a number of challenges.
Who were these migrants?
When?
Who were these migrants?
From where?
Yes.
Mostly from Syria, Egypt, the Arab countries. Then we had many from, especially women, from the Philippines, Sri Lanka at that time. Mostly Asia and the Arab countries at that time.
Mid-2000s.
Yeah, so a number of them were here with work permits, quite a large number, but there were also a number of asylum seekers or people who have mostly cut through the buffer zone and they were here without any papers. So they were invisible.
So this asylum seeker, I suppose, had been created by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? or in Africa?
At that time, not from Africa.
Only Middle East.
We
Middle
had
East.
from Iraq,
Iraq.
some, very few from Somalia,
Mhm.
even then, not even Afghanistan.
Not-
Yeah, yeah. The asylum seekers were still, their number was still low. The number of asylum seekers, so we had Kurds, for example,
Mhm.
from Iraq and Turkey and Syria, people of Kurdish origin. But the number of asylum seekers started rising when the war in Syria erupted in 2011. Yeah. And from then onwards, we had quite a number of asylum seekers from other regions as well. But at that time, um, so we had mostly migrants here on work permits, working with low wages, living in large numbers in buildings that were not suitable, without any contact with the Cypriot society. So that was the first few things we started to look after as municipality.
Employment conditions and housing conditions.
Housing conditions, especially.
And you mentioned a third problem, which is that some of them had come irregularly via the green line, via the buffer zone.
Yeah, yeah. So you can understand that at that time we were still experimenting on a lot of things. But at that time, first we had to do various surveys, so to have an idea numerically where most of these people were from, their customs, their needs. At the same time, we had to deal with religious conflicts or, let's say, differences. After 1974, after the Turkish invasion in Cyprus, the mosques in the free part of Nicosia were not working. We didn't have imams for
the mosques, yes,
the mosques. Yeah,
were abandoned.
yeah. So at some point we had to deal with the religious needs as well.
They wanted mosques also.
Yes, yes. And things like that. So surveys were the first thing. Starting programs for inclusion, to further inclusion, to help people with skills necessary for seeking a better employment, looking after children. These were mostly the priorities, and housing conditions. But housing conditions, to be honest, we focused more on the proprietors, on the owners of the houses, rather than the migrants themselves.
That is, what do you mean?
I mean that
Those migrants that were renting from
yes,
landlords,
yes,
and so you were working with the landlord so that they improve
They improve the conditions.
the conditions.
They,
Those landlords were Greek Cypriots.
yes, yes, yes. To improve the conditions, because in many cases we had landlords renting old shops with no bath or toilet or whatever. So we had to work with the landlords to improve the living conditions and to stop them from renting to a large number of people in buildings that were not suitable for that. I mean, you couldn't have 20 people in a house that would normally hold 5 or 6 persons.
For them or for the neighbors as well, I suppose, who was complaining about
Yes.
this issue.
Oh, yes, yes.
I mean, you were solicited by the neighbors about this situation, or
I think both factors played a role. In these cases, for example, usually the complaints from the neighbors were more and insistent, and this created friction as well
with
with the migrants. I mean,
so there were some neighborhood conflicts.
Yeah, yeah.
So between the migrants and the neighbors were complaining about this offer use of building.
Yes. For example, you cannot have 20 people taking a shower in the garden with a hose because the building was not suitable. So we tried to improve living conditions and at the same time deal with friction between migrants and Cypriots.
Was your role only a role of intermediary, conciliatory role, or did you also involve the police expelling migrants from housings?
In Cyprus, the municipalities do not have any jurisdiction over the police.
Okay.
So the police was involved in some cases, especially with these, let's say, campaigns of gathering immigrants that were here illegally, with immigrants with no papers. But that
not for neighborhood conflicts. The police came to take migrants who were here irregularly, not because, I mean, perhaps one reason they were involved was a neighborhood conflict, and then
but it was with other political orders.
These neighborhood conflicts escalate in some circumstances in violences between migrants and neighbors, or it was just complaints?
No.
Okay.
In my experience, the incidents of violence involving migrants were very rare. At least
when you were mayor.
As long as I was a mayor. And mostly the incidents involved rivalry between immigrants themselves.
What type?
Either religious or political.
Okay. That's interesting. But just before we move to that, just to stay on this issue of housing, you said that they were mostly located in the old city of Nicosia. How do you explain that?
because after 1974, a large number of buildings in the old city were abandoned.
I see.
And it also included some areas outside the old city, but along the Green Line, in Kaimakli or Agios Dometios, for example.
Mhm.
I mean, these were areas that were mostly abandoned after 1974. So buildings were available. The
So
owners.
they were squatting.
Hmm?
So the migrants were squatting, or there was a
Oh no,
landlord?
they were renting.
Okay,
They were
so there was a
renting.
landlord, but the building was abandoned.
Or it was not used. It was left.
But there was
Without-
someone who was had the property right over the
Oh,
building.
yes.
And these persons said, okay, my building is not used, so I will let migrants pay your rent to
Yes.
it. All right.
Yes.
Okay. And so this type of buildings was found primarily in the old city because this is where the Turkish Cypriots that who lived there were
Or the
left.
Greek Cypriots, because we're talking mostly about Greek Cypriot owners.
So why were the buildings abandoned then? I thought
Because people didn't feel safe. For some years, people didn't feel safe, so they left.
due to the invasion of the
Yes, because even after the summer of 1974, for a number of years there were, not conflicts, but various incidents that made people insecure. So,
Where did those people move? Abroad or elsewhere on the island?
some abroad, mostly elsewhere. Yeah.
So they feared that Nicosia would be taken over
Yes,
entirely and they
yes,
preferred to live
yes,
in
yes,
Limassol or Larnaca. Okay.
yeah.
And then as time passed by, they said, okay, let's rent the place to.
Some of them may have returned to their house, but they didn't want to. They didn't feel safe enough to spend for keeping the house up to standards or whatever. So
Yeah.
when the
I
house
see.
became a difficult place to live, they moved outside. Or the older generation of the family was left in the house, and at some time they had to move as well.
Yeah.
Various reasons, but there was a number of buildings available.
I see.
And it was cheap for the migrants, but it was very good money for the landlords, because the landlords didn't rent a house or a shop or an apartment with a fixed rent. The rent was according to the persons. So if you pay 100 euros and there are other 9 people like you living together paying 100 euros, for you 100 euros may be a very cheap rent, but for the landlord, it's a rent combined he will never find anywhere else.
But were those contracts regular contracts or was there outside of the legislation?
Oh no, outside.
It was
Mostly
but
black.
It was black market.
Oh yes,
But
mostly.
was there a fixed regulation of rental contracts in Nicosia back then, or it was free? I mean, those contracts were illegal, or it's just that the municipality and the republic did not regulate rental contracts.
Oh no, rental contracts are not regulated.
Still now.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was legal.
Yeah.
Even though informal.
But in most of these cases there was no contracts.
Not even a contract.
Yeah.
But that was legal to have.
No, it's not. It's not illegal. The but the regulation comes from the point of view of taxing. So you have to declare a rental agreement because you have to pay tax for the rent.
Was not paying taxes?
Oh no,
Not even. Okay.
no.
So this was
That's why
clearly black
most
market
of
is
these
gone.
renting agreements were verbal, or the renting agreement was with one person, but another 10 persons lived in the same place.
So, the main incentive for the landlords and the migrants to not to pay the taxes and not to declare the contract was to, I mean, the main incentive not to declare the contract was not to pay taxes. But there was not, for instance, in other countries, you have some strict regulations of rental contracts. You cannot rent a place if it doesn't have that number of square meters per person, baths, as you say, and so on and so forth. But that type of regulations did not exist.
No,
in
they don't
Cyprus.
exist. No, but there is some similar regulations, and that's what we used in the end, concerning public health. So the municipality started at some point when discussing and trying to encourage was not very successful. We started closing down buildings that were not up to standards.
So you, but
Yeah,
okay, so you intervene by force.
Yes, in those cases.
For public health reasons this time.
Yeah, based on public health regulations.
Did you have outbreaks of diseases?
No.
No, but
No.
you feel that there could be.
No, not really. But it was a very productive, very practical, and very immediate way to bring change.
Okay, so you put forward public health reasons to have this situation stop.
Yeah, up to a point.
Up to a point. I see. So I understand that there was a combination of factors. On the one hand, there was a geopolitical conditions. It reminds me of this German chancellor of just before the First World War. His name was Bethmann Olweg. He had told his son in Eastern Germany, do not grow trees on your field because they will benefit the Russians, because in a few years the Russians will take over. So the landlords of Nicosia were a bit like him. They were saying, I'm not going to invest much in that building because in a few years it may have been occupied as well. And on the top of that, there are these migrants coming who were ready to accept very poor housing conditions. So there was no incentive for the landlords to invest.
You summarized it
in their properties.
Very good.
And then you mentioned, so for public health reasons, I mean, putting forward public health reasons, the municipality came in at some point and stopped the situation. But you also said that there could be conflicts between migrants, but for religious or political reasons. Could you elaborate on that? Do you remember of a case?
I'm not well versed in the details, but for example, we had conflicts between Sunni and Shiite Muslims.
In the context of, in which context of in the 2000s or earlier than this?
At that time, 2000.
Why were there in conflicts?
I'm not. I don't know. But,
Okay.
for example, Some mosques had Shiite imams,
Mhm.
some had Sunni imams. I can't.
Okay, there were
But there were,
rivalries between the communities to dedicate a particular mosque to a particular confession.
yes. But I'm just saying that the incidents of violence were mostly between migrants, and usually the reasons were either religious, mostly between different sectors of Muslim religion, uh, not only, but usually, and political.
What type of politics?
Amongst Syrians, for example.
Before the outbreak of the civil war, or after? Even before.
Even before, yes. Or between Kurds, Kurds supporting PKK, Kurds against PKK.
And
Kurds
this,
coming from Syria, Kurds coming from Turkey.
so you have instances in which there will be physical violence
Yes.
between those groups in the streets,
Yes.
or at night, in the day,
Yes, yes.
at night or in the day, in broad daylight, or
Usually at night.
usually at
Yeah.
night. Yeah, I see. Okay. And how did you react to that?
No, the municipality was not
Involved.
involved in these cases. The police took
Over.
over. And to be honest, we were not prepared. We were not in a position to deal with this phenomena. These were new phenomena for Cyprus. Yeah.
And what was those people living from? What was their activity? How did they earn a living in Cyprus?
Most of them were working in the building industry.
Construction. With work permits, you say, no?
Yes, yes. In agriculture, but mostly in the building industry, especially people from the Arab countries, Syria, Egypt. They were in the building industry.
And so those people had work permits, so they were employed legally, paying social security, taxes.
Yeah, the majority. As I said, the numbers of asylum seekers were just starting to grow. Up to then, the number of refugees we had in Cyprus were in small numbers.
And did you have a minimum wage back then in Cyprus?
Yes.
Yes. So why were these people not able to pay a normal rent if they had regular employment contracts paid above the minimum wage?
You mean legally
Binding minimum wage.
No.
There was not at that time.
No. But that's
so they had very low wages. Okay.
And most of them in the cases, most of them were working with smaller employers.
Small
So yes, so they were not covered with collective agreements.
Yes. Okay.
So they didn't have overtime, or they were working on Saturdays and Sundays without any.
I see. And there was no comprehensive minimum wage. All right. So they were able to find works with small companies in construction sector, a little bit perhaps in agriculture as well. And they were living in this quasi-abandoned building in the old town.
Yeah, and these are mostly men.
Mostly men.
But this is also because there was and there is a large
Young
number
men.
of women working
These were young men.
in Cyprus, mostly young men, yes.
Mhm.
But a large number of women are working in-house.
Oh, they were not alone on the island. They had their perhaps wives, or the wives were working.
No. They're working as domestic helpers.
But this,
So they stayed in the house of the family who employed them.
okay. So the two were.
So in the city, we had very few women living, migrant women living in the city, and very few families.
And
Very few families.
were those young men and these women connected? Or they were, it's just that the men had some jobs, the women had other jobs, and they were not creating families.
No, they were not really creating.
They were not related, huh?
Families or relationships, mostly because there were cultural differences as well. The women were mostly from Asia, Philippines, Sri Lanka.
I see.
The men
From
were
Arab
mostly from Arab countries.
So these women, they were working as domestics in various mansions of the island. I see. I see.
I'm not saying that there was no contact or relationships were formed, and in some cases families were created. But at that time, in few cases, the only contact point was Sunday activities, because all these people usually did not work on Sundays, so they gathered in parks mostly to spend their day with people from their country, friends they had, or whatever.
I see. And these people intended to stay in Cyprus for good, or most of them were just transiting?
No, most of them were here for no. Most of them had were planning to go back to their countries, especially the women.
I see.
But then in various cases, other problems. For example, Syrians, from some point onwards, they were not able to return. So they stayed even longer and created families and brought their families over.
They brought the family.
Yeah.
And so back then, when you were mayor of Nicosia, the work of those people was declared. It was declared work. They had work permit. They were officially hired. What was unofficial was the rental contracts. But you suggested a bit earlier that after the outbreak of the civil war in Syria, you had many more asylum seekers, that is, people who had not come, did not have a regular status otherwise. Did things change then? Did
Yes.
undeclared work become more widespread?
Yes, undeclared work existed even before. Because even people with working permits did work on the side.
As well. Okay.
As well.
Okay, so some of them worked regularly, paying social security and taxes, but others already, when you were a mayor, were working irregularly as in undeclared works, and so with no social security payments and very low
on
wage.
The side.
On the side.
On the side.
On the top, you mean? Or
no. Yes, on top of their work, they did something else that was undeclared.
I see.
But then with refugees arriving and the fact that refugees were not allowed to work
Yes.
until their applications, sorry, asylum seekers were
Yes.
not allowed to work until their status was decided. Then we had a lot of undeclared work. Yeah.
So the key factor was the change in status and the fact that normally an asylum seeker doesn't have the right to work. And as a result, there was a rise in undeclared work in the same sectors, construction, agriculture.
Mostly, yeah.
Mostly. So I understand that there was a turning point around 2011 with the outbreak of the so-called Arab revolutions. Before that, there was undeclared work, but it was something additional for regular workers with work permits. After that, it became more widespread, and it was a complete activity. I mean, people didn't have any declared work because their status, in any case, did not allow them to work. And as a result, there was a loss in taxes, social security contributions, and my sources tell me that now there is a minimum wage in Cyprus.
Yes, there is.
Since when was it implemented?
Um,
Perhaps around that time?
2, 3 years ago.
Oh, it's very recent.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
There was a minimum wage earlier.
In collective agreements.
Yes, but it covered only selected professions,
I see.
sectors of work.
Now it's general.
Yeah.
Okay. And all right. And
but because we are talking about undeclared work,
yes,
even before the rise in asylum seekers numbers, we had a serious problem of undeclared work, but not from so-called students or brides, from people engaged in weddings, false weddings.
So can you elaborate on that? Let's start with the students.
Yeah. A market was created because the needs in various sectors of the economy were rising. Agriculture, for example, the building industry, mostly tourism from some time afterwards. So let's say colleges appeared that provided courses linked with practical training. And then we started having students from various countries that never studied. They came here and they worked.
So there were education institutions who pretended to provide skills, but for agriculture and tourism, for those sectors. I mean,
for whatever.
Because in the sectors you have also very low skilled workers.
Yes.
Many workers in the sector
right.
do not need any skills. But apparently you suggest there was a need for skilled workers as well in those sectors, which justified these education institutions.
Oh no. These institutions, for example, they provided tourism courses.
Okay. Yes. So.
But the people who came, the so-called students, didn't necessarily work in tourism. They could work anywhere.
Okay, but they were completing the degrees or not?
Oh no, never. I mean,
I see. I see.
these colleges
Were fake
even have
students.
they were not doing lessons or anything.
I see.
They were just a stamp to get a visa and come to work, because it's the number of people from third countries allowed to work in Cyprus is limited.
That
There
is,
there is a special procedure.
so people from non-EU countries, because Cyprus joined in 2004, were limited in numbers. And so this, okay, coming as a student, allowed to bypass this quota. Okay. And so people, and though they found these willing migrants, they found a kind of irregular channel. I mean, that pretended to be regular. You had institutions that pretended to be educational institutions that declared those migrants as students, that they could bypass the quota. But in practice, they were not studying and they were just working irregularly in agriculture or tourism. I see. And I suppose this practice last long, or at some point did you make it stop?
Oh yes, it stopped mainly. I don't know. I think the last years, at least I don't know of any cases, of any new cases. It stopped, but we are changing things in Cyprus. We change things very slowly. So it took us a long time
to regulate,
to understand the problem, first of all,
I see.
and then to regulate and implement these regulations.
So what did you do to make? So here we're talking of the time when you were mayor of Nicosia, or are we already at the time when you were minister of the
it
interior?
started even when I was earlier, even when I was.
But did you have authority as a mayor?
Especially after our accession to the European Union. No, we didn't have any authority.
So it's more when you were Minister of the Interior that you had the authority to crack down on those practices. But so you mentioned a quota. Was this quota created when you joined the EU, or did it exist before you joined the EU?
No, before as well.
Okay.
Even, I mean,
you had country per country quotas?
No,
or?
not really, per sector.
Per sector.
Yes.
Okay.
And this was a characteristic of our migration policy almost from the early 90s. That no migrants were allowed to come in sectors where there was, where there were Cypriots interested in working. If you have an employment in a specific sector, at that time at least, the permits were not given to bring workers from other countries.
And yet there were employers willing to hire in the exception, even in those sectors.
Yeah.
I see. So this was a request from trade unions, perhaps, to have those quotas? Okay, trade unions wanted to have those quotas so that Greek Cypriots have priority.
Yeah.
I see. And but you say things change when Cyprus joined the EU. Why? If those quotas existed already before, why did EU accession make the problem you mentioned of fake students more widespread?
Because in many cases, they had a problem getting a visa for the European Union.
Even though Cyprus is not part of Schengen, there was still a new regulation of visa once you join the EU?
No, I mean that a lot of them considered Cyprus a first stop in moving elsewhere in
So
Europe, but that was not in practice so easy because
know,
we are
of
not in
course.
Schengen.
Yeah. So the fact that you were an EU country actually made you more attractive for a number of migrants.
Yes.
So it created a stronger pressure, and this pressure found ways via this irregular
Yeah.
channel of.
Yeah.
And so I got it now. So, and what did you do to crack down on those colleges? How did you make it to make this practice stop?
I mean, and it wasn't cracked easily, and a number of governments tried to implement measures. But in the end, there were two main measures. One, checking, implement a more thorough check on the applicants at their country of origin. So we had immigration officers in various countries where the majority of the students came
You
from.
created new offices in the origin countries?
Yeah.
It must have been costly, no?
Oh, yes, it was.
Mm.
But it was for a short period of time.
Oh, just
to
make it stop.
Yeah.
The practice. Okay.
And that's on one hand, and on the other hand was the inspections of these colleges,
I see.
a real inspection. Yeah.
So I see how Cyprus became increasingly affected by rising migration pressure that found various ways to enter the country. You mentioned that there were some violence between migrants sometimes, but overall it was limited. And so far in our discussion, we have mostly talked about migrants working irregularly, but in normal sectors like agriculture, construction, tourism. Did you feel, now perhaps we move when you became Minister of Interior, even though your experience as mayor made mayors be relevant, did you have the feeling that there was a particular criminality problem with immigrants at some point? Did you find them, I mean, obviously some would come irregularly and kind of broken the law. But beyond that, did you have the feeling that they were involved in drugs, in crime, or that they were responsible for minor infractions at night in the streets? Was it your impression or not?
At least police statistics do not
Back
up this reasoning. Migrants are mostly involved in petty crimes.
Petty crimes.
Yes,
Such
small
as?
thefts, not in real serious crimes. But I'm not sure if this is the case anymore.
So you're talking when you were mayor or minister?
No, I mean, when I was a minister, even until a few years back, I know the police statistics. They are very clear. They don't show a large number of immigrants being involved in crime, especially serious.
What do you call serious crimes?
I mean, armed robbery or attacks that.
I mean, murders.
Yeah, or bodily harm or whatever.
Physical violence?
Yeah, mostly migrants were involved in petty
thefts.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh,
And these were what type of migrants? Men, those who had undeclared work,
mostly men, mostly men.
men with undeclared work. It was young men with
No,
undeclared,
I don't,
or even young
I
men
don't
without
know.
any work.
I don't have
Minors?
that.
Could it be minors? No.
I don't have this information.
Mhm. So you did not have the feeling that migrants were involved in serious violence or in drugs or in serious.
No.
Okay. All right. And so we mentioned the various pressures of immigration, various channels of immigration in the country. Those student arrangements. So what about the Green Line? Was it a major factor in irregular immigration in Cyprus, or would immigration have come anyway?
No, the Green Line plays a major factor.
So they first arrived in the north
Yeah,
and they cross irregularly
Yeah.
the Green
I
Line.
mean, being an island makes irregular immigration more difficult. Even though we do have a large number of people coming as tourists, for example, and overstay their visa to work.
Mm.
But the vast majority is through the Green Line.
Or the majority of those who come irregularly
Yeah.
use this channel,
Yeah.
especially perhaps in the student arrangement was
Yeah.
closed down. So,
Mm.
so is it? When did it start? This migration, irregular migration through the Green Line.
As I said, generally, irregular migration started rising after our accession to the and our accession to the European Union and asylum seekers. But I think that irregular migration, not irregular migration, asylum seekers, with the beginning of the civil war in Syria, I think we saw numbers rising very.
And this is when crossings via the Green Line also increased.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm.
And by boat.
Both arriving in the
Yes.
north or directly in the territory of the river?
Directly to the south.
Directly to the south.
Yeah. But
So
mostly through the Green Line. Yeah.
mostly through the Green Line. And in the north, they arrive by boat or by plane?
Both.
Both. Mhm.
Yeah.
What do you think is the responsibility of the authorities in the north in this situation? They turn a blind eye, or they encourage it, or they just cannot cope?
Well, I don't know the answer. There are people supporting all three scenarios, as you've said,
Yeah.
here in Cyprus. For example, Turkey took over a vast number of Syrian refugees. So some say that Turkey couldn't cope, so they just encouraged people to leave through North Cyprus.
Via planes? Via flights?
Yes, yes.
Do you think they paid their flight tickets? Or it was just advice? Take this plane to Cyprus?
No, they didn't pay, as far as I know.
The migrants had to pay their tickets, and but some people perhaps in the authorities told them, oh, if you go there,
you will be able to go to Europe
to the via the Green Line.
easily. Then some say there's another scenario saying that Turkey deliberately sends these extreme Muslim young men to the south to create problems.
Oh, so they suggest that they were selected. They selected the most dangerous.
Yes.
And here we are after your time in office. Huh?
Oh yes.
It's the most recent years.
Yeah.
Huh? I see. But during your time in office, I understand it had already started. This crossing
it had already started. Well, I was a minister only for a year. Then at that time, we cooperated with the EASO, the European Asylum Office, because we were not equipped to deal with that large number of asylum seekers. So for some time, we had officers from EASO in Cyprus helping with the examination of various applications. They left and they came back recently. So yes, we were trying to deal with something that was quite new.
That is just to process those who have come. It's not a proactive policy to try to prevent them from coming once ESO is involved. It's getting UL to process those who have arrived.
At that time, no. Europe was still let's say, sticking to its asylum principles. Now it's not. Now refugees, I mean, people are not only not encouraged, they are prevented from seeking asylum.
But in Cyprus, it's a bit difficult to do that. For instance, in Greece, you have special centers, and even there, it's not very easy to expel people once they have reached Greece.
Yes, that's why we don't allow them to reach.
With the issue of the Green Line, it's very hard to stop migration.
Yes. For example, we had a number of pushbacks concerning boats.
By the Cypriot police?
Yes. Yes. There was a recent tragic case.
Where?
Outside near Paphos.
Okay. They came from Libya?
Yeah.
Paphos? Okay.
But the Green Line's another story. It's very difficult to control.
And did the UN play any role when you were Minister of the Interior in preventing these crossings?
No.
Why?
Because if they try to, first of all, the UN doesn't patrol all the buffer zone. It patrols certain points. We are talking about very low buffer line. But then we had cases where the United Nations, the UNFICYL, was left with the responsibility of asylum seekers because they managed to get in the buffer zone.
The offices, yes, okay.
They managed to get in the buffer zone.
Migrants,
they were not allowed to reach the Greek Cypriot checkpoint to apply for asylum to the Republic of Cyprus, they were not allowed to go back to
Because they
the
were in between. Huh?
yes. So the UNFICYP was left with the responsibility of looking after these people, and they don't like it.
Mm. Why? Because they don't have the capacities to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it happened that in some rare cases, I mean, I understand these migrants at that time were somehow law-abiding migrants because they wanted to cross via the regular checkpoint. And they ended up in the no man's land, and the UN was left with them. But many cross outside of the regular checkpoint, and near the UN doesn't do anything. I understand listening to you that you have there may be an issue with the EU because on the one hand you are an EU member, and so this gives you a label that attracts migrants to the island, and on the other side you are not part of Schengen, so that you are actually at the border of the EU, and so you end up a bit as a dead end for many migrants, especially given your geographical locations. You are close to areas of conflicts. So you have potentially many migrants who come here thinking they are reaching the EU, but at the end of the day, they are blocked here. So, but is it something new, or did it already start when you were in charge?
No, it was already there. But add another factor that in the recent years the EU had a number of agreements with countries of origin of refugees. One of these countries is Turkey. So there is an agreement that Turkey will take back
2016.
whoever, but this does not apply to Cyprus because Turkey does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus. So if asylum seekers, for example, crossing Greece from Turkey, according to the agreement, Turkey will take them back if the Greek authorities send them back. Turkey will accept them, but this does not apply in our case.
So, do you think there is a problem with EU membership? What would be your solution to that? To the fact that you are an EU country, which makes you attractive for migrants, and you are not part of Schengen, which makes you outside of the border. So, what has been the official Cypriot policy about this? Joining Schengen, for instance, or?
Yes, we would love to join
Schengen.
Mm-hmm.
It was already the time when you were minister.
Yes, and
the others don't want.
There were cases, even now there is, let's say, a form of communication with the European Union and the Republic of Cyprus concerning Schengen. At least until now, I understand that the European Union doesn't feel that Cyprus is a secure point of origin because of the Green Line. So I don't know what will happen with Schengen. That's one thing. What we have as Cyprus, we have already always supported that the refugees should be allotted to various European countries, distributed to various distributed countries, so that the countries of the first entry would not take all the burden. And of course, as far as I am concerned, it would play a major role if the European Union worked so that conditions in the countries of origin were improved, either as far as conflicts and war is concerned, or as living conditions.
Do you receive Palestinian refugees?
Oh yes, for a long time, Palestinians and Kurds were the only refugees in Cyprus.
But now they keep coming with the recent events in Gaza. I mean, perhaps you don't know that.
I don't know numbers,
No, yes.
but yeah.
All right. And so it was a very interesting discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you very much. Are you still working on migration questions today? What are your projects today?
Not directly, but I'm still interested and involved in various projects concerning the city. So indirectly, yes, migrants are also part of these projects. I mean, for example,
You remain involved in the municipal life.
yeah. Public spaces, their use, the role they play in social cohesion. Yeah,
All right.
things like that.
Okay, so Mrs. Mavrou, thank you very much for your time and for sharing with us your very rich experience and all those details about migrants integration in Cyprus in the last 15 years or even 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.